Hello, sewing people of the internet. Occasionally I use inner tubes. Well, not really occasionally. A lot of the time I use inner tubes on the bottom of backpacks and other kinds of bags. And I've had several questions about some tips on sewing with inner tubes. This is not going to be an all-inclusive video that gives you every piece of information you need to know to sew inner tubes. There's one piece of information that I think is important, and that is get a walking foot sewing machine. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm working on a duffel bag project that's going to involve an inner tube bottom for the bag, and I thought I would carve out this information so it's not just buried in a much longer tutorial on a duffel bag. The inner tube I'm using in this circumstance is a motorcycle inner tube. I have no idea what kind of motorcycle, what size tire. I know nothing about it. I got this from a motorcycle shop that gives them to me whenever they have some to throw away. So what I'm going to show you in this video is some tricks that I'm going to use to turn this tubular shaped object into something a little bit flatter that will conform better to the bag that I'm making. In some instances, I just use one solid piece of inner tube, particularly if it's motorcycle inner tube, because it's big enough for a lot of the backpacks that I make. So you would just sew it in. What I usually do is sew that to a piece of usually the fabric that the bag is made out of, or some scrap Cordura or some other substantial fabric, and then sew that into the pack as if it was just a regular panel. If you don't have access to motorcycle inner tube, but you do have bicycle inner tubes, either of your own or a place you can get them, and I'm pretty sure most bike shops would be happy to give you the ones that they have to throw away. You know, if you just, any bike shop you have in your area, just go ask them. I would be willing to bet you'd be able to find some. With bicycle inner tubes, I tend to sew them together. I'll show you the method I usually use when I sew them together. But I can just make a big panel. Sewing it together this way kind of flattens things out a little bit too, makes it a little bit better fit for most of the applications I use them for. With these larger diameter tubes, when you cut sections out, what you think is a straight line may not be a straight line. So I'll lay them flat on a table and cut it so that it's straight, or it doesn't have to be laser straight. But you can see this piece, which is cut out of this tube, just by straightening those edges, is a little bit flatter. There's still going to be extra material in the, you know, if there's a trick to make this perfectly flat, besides maybe gluing it to a very firm fabric or substrate of some kind, then I don't know a way to do it, but this will be good enough. So I want to point this out. I just cut this piece off of here, and you know, as you can see, this is pretty straight, and this piece wants to be curved again, so I'm going to again cut it straight. I don't know what kind of weird magic is happening that makes this happen, but this is what I'm doing. Okay, so sewing machines. So in a recent review I did of my Bernina Record 930, I demonstrated attempting to sew some bicycle inner tube with that machine, and basically made the comment that, you know, it wasn't that great for that. And I've had several people comment very correctly that you could use a walking foot attachment that would make that work better, or a Teflon foot, or a roller foot. There's a couple of different options that I have no doubt would make it better at sewing something like inner tube. My pretty consistent advice for the last 6-7 years, or however long this has been going on, is if you like to sew the kinds of things that I tend to sew on this channel, waxed canvas, Cordura, webbing, and inner tubes, and maybe some leather and stuff, I've always said you need a walking foot machine ultimately. There's a reason that I say that. I could take one of my Singer 201s or that Bernina and use it to sew lighter weight materials, and then make some change like put a walking foot on it or a roller foot or Teflon foot or whatever, and get it to do an okay job, maybe even a good job of sewing this inner tube together. But this Consew 206 and virtually any other walking foot machine, my Sailrite, my Thompson, my other Consew, I can sew, this is 400 denier pack cloth. This is about as light of a material as I use in making a bag. And I can sew this material just fine, just as the machine sits. And then I can go straight to inner tube. And I don't have to change the foot or do anything special. I didn't even change the tension, didn't change thread, didn't change anything. So for me, if I'm going to sew this kind of material with any kind of regularity, I need a walking foot sewing machine. I'm not saying your machine can't do it. I'm not saying that you have to buy a walking foot sewing machine if you want to do this kind of thing. But if you like to do this kind of thing frequently, you probably want a walking foot sewing machine. Okay, so I sewed two pieces right sides together, and now I'm just going to top stitch that seam. This top stitching will help encourage this to lay flatter. And I'm just using V69 thread, which is what I use for almost everything. One thing to think about when you're doing this, you may want all of your foldovers for your top stitch to go in the same direction, or you may want them to be in opposite directions depending on, if this is the center of the panel you're making, it might be cool to have that fold over on either side. I'm just going to keep them all running in the same direction. And I'm just lining the edge of my foot along the fold to make this seam line consistent. Alright, so that's just some quick information, absolutely not all-inclusive, on some tricks I use to try to get inner tube to behave itself when I sew it into a project. This panel, when I make it big enough, will be making the bottom of the duffel bag I'm working on. If you want to see the finished project and you're not subscribed, make sure you click on the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you know when I release new videos. If you have any questions or comments, post them in the comment section below. Clicking like is always a big help, as is buying merchandise from the shelf you'll see below. And there's a link in the description. Thanks for watching.